for you.
Thank you. Welcome to the graveyard shift. So please, but we had a bit of comedy, so hopefully you're awake. So I'm a postdoc at Crest. I work for Marina, and I have the honor to work for Marina. And I investigate how social sciences and natural sciences are communicated kind of differently. So this kind of introduction into where I'm going with this. And the talk is clearly on creatively engaging the public and basic neuroscience. But the small print, the imperative of mental privacy and data protection is really important for me because I'm a lawyer. Now, I just wanted to find out how many lawyers are there in the audience today? Yes. Okay, I feel better. Okay, so you will understand that I focus on the small print. So my idea is that many of you, the past 2 days, communicated how to communicate basic science. So I want to dovetail this in how do you use humanities, law, and what this means in basic science communication. So not being a scientist, neuroscience is a discovery science, I established. So neuroscience is expanding our understanding of the natural world through curiosity-driven investigations, which is very important. And for me, most important was without immediate applications in mind. Remember, it's curiosity-driven. Sometimes we need to understand things just for the sake of understanding it and see where it leads us. But I will come back to without immediate applications in mind, because this may be something different in science communication as opposed to communication from the humanities point of view. So this entails studying how neurons communicate, how the brain networks are organized, and how different brain regions contribute to behavior and cognition. The neuroscientists among you will know this, including molecular and cellular neuroscience, systems neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, and behavioral. Provide the foundational knowledge that informs applied sciences and medical fields, which can lead to the development of new treatments of neurological disorders and mental illness. But we're not there yet with discovery science. That will be the downstream application. So that brings me back to the highlight without immediate application in mind. So in neuroscience, keeping that without immediate application in mind, in the back of your mind, in neuroscience you deal with complex and often abstract topics such as consciousness, memory, perception, and neural computation. These often involve techniques like optogenetics, electrophysiology, and brain imaging. And this is exactly when you use these techniques where the lawyer in me comes alive. It says that various types of data can be collected, each with different levels of sensitivity, which requires different levels of data protection. Now, as opposed to without immediate application in mind, this data has immediate repercussions, not in mind, in life. So this is exactly where, even with discovery sciences, the communication of social sciences, such as humanities, law particularly, may have an immediate impact. So just to give you an idea, and if I talk you through this list of data, just remember, what types of data points would you like not to have in the public domain or communicated to certain people or not about yourself? So in neuroscientific research, they can collect the following: demographic data, which is age, gender, ethnicity, which is a sensitive topic, educational background, clinical data, medical history, diagnoses, treatment records, neuroimaging data, MRI scans, fMRI data, PET scans, CT scans, genetic data, DNA sequences, genetic markers, epigenetic information, biometric data, fingerprints, retinal scans, facial recognition data. Behavioral data, and this is where it becomes tricky. Response times, accuracy in tasks, eye tracking data, especially if your employer collects these data from you with some kind of neurotech machinery. Psychometric data, questionnaire responses, psychological assessments, cognitive test scores. Who would you like to have access to those? Physiological data, your heart rate, your galvanic skin responses, EEG data, and lastly, your behavioral observational data, video recordings of behavior and observational notes. So you can see there's various levels of sensitivity, There's various points of data which I would not like my employer, my life insurer, my medical insurer, my family to know about me. So you can see that the basic scientific research leads to immediate consequences, that leads to immediate types of communication that needs to happen, at least from a humanities side, from a legal side. So what do I need to communicate then? So this sensitive data requires, obviously, data protection in terms of the data protection laws. This is not a legal lecture. I'm not going to bore you with any laws. But it requires informed consent from the research participant. And they must know exactly the nature of the data that's being collected, why are you using it, and whom are you giving it to. Is it identified or anonymized, depending on which country you come from? Can you de-identify or anonymize it? Does it care? Does it make the research worthwhile if I only use de-identified data? And data minimization. So there's loads of rights that these data subjects can enjoy just because you did basic neuroscience research on them. And those rights are already protected in many data protection laws globally. So let's see what is currently communicated in this context. So there's very, very cute neurocomics. They deal with the biology, the neuroscience behind it, how the brain works, who invented this and that, and it tells you the entire story. There are libraries full of them. They're very, very valuable. There are interactive exhibitions. You can scan someone in his brain in a museum. You can hold all sorts of interactive interactions with these things. Then virtual reality fairly recently came on the scene, where they use it to train medical students, to give mere people like me insight into what a brain looks like without smelling the blood. And then there's citizen science, which there's lots of communities, and we have the honor to have civic science members here with us. So they will tell you all about what's going on in these organizations. And then lastly, which hooks more onto what I've been doing, is there's documentaries and films that tells a story. And the story for me is important, because what I've seen thus far with the materials I've shown you, it tells me everything about the biology, about the science, but it doesn't tell me about my rights. And as I try to show you, it's really important that you know your rights, your data protection rights. And this is social science communication off the back of basic science research. So based on these stories, which doesn't touch necessarily on your rights, it opens up a narrative. It puts places in a scene. And from this scene, you can use to facilitate discussions about your rights, about what does the science do to you? How does it work? How does it open me up for exploitation, manipulation? So what I usually do, and this is just an example of an entry-level comic, which I usually design to sketch a certain scenario and a scene that will open up and facilitate discussions. Now, in this case, where do you start this conversation? And the conversation, I suppose, would start in the waiting room of a research center, or a pamphlet of a research center. Just hook the person there and then, identify with the research participant or the medical or the patient, and give him something to look at while he waits. And this comic, very briefly, I think I'll happy to share my slides afterwards, just depicts a young guy that comes in for some tests. He's got no idea what some tests, his brain, something's wrong with it, he doesn't know. And then the conversation starts. Doctors say we'll be running a series of tests that will help us understand your brain better. What kind of tests? It's a good question for any patient to ask. Then the doctor tries to describe what kinds of tests. And this test will, amongst other things, gather neurodata, information about your brain activity, structure, and functions. So immediately red flag for a lawyer, okay? So Alex will then, the fictional guy in this comic, is that information safe? Now here is something that a standard research participant or patient will not think of. Nobody ever asks a doctor, is my information safe? But the idea behind something like this in a waiting room is at least trigger the conversation. At least, oh, there's information, it may possibly not be safe because why is he asking? So then the comic goes on and say, great question, this is the different kinds of data we can collect from whatever tests we are doing. There's structural data, functional, behavioral, emotional data, and goes on and on. And then the patient can ask, so who has access to this? Again, another question no patient ever asks because they don't think it's important and they trust the doctor and it's not front of mind for them. You just want to get better, especially where there's something wrong with your brain. So here the physician or the PI can explain that only certain members of a research team's got access and that's your entry point for you have data protection rights. But at least you have to trigger the right questions. So the rest of the comic, I'm not going to bore you with the rest, it's just showing, ask the right questions, where to find the right answers, how your data is protection, what does encryption look like, what does it mean, what is the hacking of your information's risk, and hopefully at the end of the day, it ends off with a guy walking out of the clinic feeling more empowered and in control of his medical records, including his brain data. So this is a very, very brief overview of the type of comics I do. Usually, I do comics with a much more narrative setting, where you dump a person literally within a setting, a scene. For instance, the latest one with regards to neuroscience I did was on brain implants. What happens if you transplant the brain of an artist into AI? What will end up? And then you ask him, sketch out of complete the uncompleted story, the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. And in between there is all the information that I'm interested, all the information that social scientists are interested, the psychologists, what does manipulation means in this context, what does right means, and I'm done. Thank you so much.